Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Oh,
Am I here?
can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes,
I
and I hear you
can't.
too.
Am I here?
If the question is, so I can hear you and I have a video of your floor, which,
Really?
yeah, but I'm not, yeah. So I think your camera is perhaps pointed towards your floor.
Apparently, Hangouts decided to use the front-facing camera.
Yeah, I think that's what it did. I'm not sending video because, well, I don't think it's going to help.
Okay. I don't even know if I need to send video either. Fascinating.
There you
Okay.
go. That is you, yes.
And is it just us?
Right now, it is just you and I. Daniela was on the call and then dropped off somehow.
Okay.
So.
Okay, well, sorry I didn't get back to your emails earlier yesterday.
That's okay. It'll be what it'll be. I think we're all juggling too many balls. What's new?
That's right. Yeah, so and I think based off of my memory of your call, your previous talk, my talk will set up yours, but one question is whether I should drop one of the videos. I think that, and when I get to it, I think I might tell you which one I'll drop.
Which one is
it?
Which one?
I think so. I have one where I apply the brakes, and I thought that I would say, and then in Stefan's talk, we'll put all these pieces together, and you'll see us, actuating the brakes from a remote capability.
Is that the Nova one?
Yeah.
Yes,
I don't have the Nova one in my deck, but
you don't.
No.
That's fine. So I'm using the Nova one and the 60 Minutes one, and that's it.
Okay.
So I think that's fine. I think there can be some repeat, because who knows? Someone may walk between talks anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Daniela says, Daniela, can you still hear us? She says, I can hear you. What's the link? I do not know anything about Hangout links.
How about I'm just going to click this thing on the top and hope that that's it.
I'll share the URL that I see.
Does your end in ZYA?
Yes.
Okay, good. And that's probably something we all share, as opposed to something unique to me.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah. How are things going otherwise?
All right. All right. Like I said, juggling too many balls, but getting through it.
That's good. I wish there was an algorithm to juggle less. I'm not sure how to do that.
I know. I think it's saying no a lot.
Yeah.
Like, what was I doing when I said yes to this? All right.
Yeah.
About 10 minutes. Oh my gosh, just set this up.
That's good. Okay, you're here. Great.
Okay, so there's not going to be any video, right? You guys are not going to show video.
No, but I could share my screen.
Okay.
When I said yes to this. All right.
About 10 minutes. Oh my gosh, just set this up.
Okay, you're here. Great.
Okay, so there's not going to be any video, right? You guys are not going to show video.
Wow, there's that weird echo from the past.
Yeah, that's what I see. Oh my gosh.
Okay, you're here. Great.
Okay, so there's not going to be.
Whoa, I see recursive desktop.
Yeah, me too.
Echo from the past.
Yeah, that's what I. Hello.
Oh my goodness.
This is really, really peculiar.
All right, shall we try that once more?
Yeah. So I can guys.
Daniela, are you connected twice? I see 2 pictures from you.
Okay.
That might be what it is. It's bouncing from one of yours to the other.
Okay, so I think now it's okay.
All right,
Okay.
you want to try sharing again, Yoshi?
Do you see that recursive sharing?
Yeah.
Well, okay, I need to take a picture of that. Not that that actually helps us.
I just have one.
Maybe I'll exit and rejoin. I don't know if that helps or not.
Every time I use Hangout, I learn a new failure mode.
Yeah. So you're going to start with Yoshi and then you, right, Stefan?
Yep, just like it's supposed to be in the schedule.
Okay. Okay, I see Yoshi now.
Can you see my screen?
Yes. Okay, yes.
And you can see my slides?
Yes.
And you can see me advance?
Yes.
Okay, well, might as well start.
Okay.
Did I do that?
Yep.
Okay, and let me start a timer, since I don't have this thing on. Okay, okay, well, thank you very much. It is a pleasure to be here. Daniel, I'm not sure if you're introducing me or someone else, but as you know, whoever introduced me said, my name is Yoshi Kono, and I'm going to be talking to you today about computer security and the Internet of Things. Before I begin, I want to say a little bit about where the results of this tech talk came from. And most importantly, this came from a bunch of great collaborations with students and other faculty at the University of Washington, as well as students and faculty at a number of other organizations. And Stefan Savage will be speaking next with one of my collaborators on this project, on some of these projects. This work was funded by the National Science Foundation, Google, Intel, and Microsoft. So stepping back, I think that as technologists, we probably all share a similar view. And that is that the view that technology can be a great enabler. It is through technology that we can improve many aspects of our lives, from work productivity, education, health, merit, accessibility, you name it, technology has the ability to improve it. But the question that security and privacy researchers often try to ask is, what are the potential security and privacy downsides with these new technologies? For example, we know that identity theft has been an issue for a very long time, but has technology only made that easier? One of the focuses that we have in our research group at the University of Washington is to try to understand what will be the hot new technologies over the next 5, 10, or 15 years. And can we try to anticipate what those security and privacy risks will be with those technologies so that we can then try to develop mechanisms to mitigate them early? Like the way I like to put it is, what we really want to do is have our cake and eat it too. We want to have the benefits of these wonderful new technologies without the associated security and privacy downsides. I want to talk with you today through several case studies about our work in this area for IoT technologies, or Internet of Things. Before we get too far into details, I want to mention that for the purposes of this talk, when I say the Internet of Things, I'm thinking of any consumer device with computational capabilities, and probably with some connectivity, though I'll get in a little bit to why that's a caveat there. High-level goal of this talk is I want to help those in the audience start thinking about the broad spectrum of security issues that can arise in an IoT environment, and maybe help you give you some ideas or some insights in the fact that IoT security may not be as simple and the issues might not be as obvious as one might think. And then the next talk, Stefan's going to follow up with a more in-depth analysis of our work on automotive security, as well as the timeline for how things happen there and so on. And of course, Stefan, we can work on debugging, if or how you want me to say.
Sure.
So moving on to our case studies. The first case study I wanted to mention was our work on wireless implantable medical devices. I have here 2 photos of an implantable cardiac device. This is a device that can be implanted inside a patient's chest and issue small shocks to the heart to keep it beating regularly. One of the things that we are seeing, and in fact have seen for a while now, is that these devices are becoming both increasingly computational and increasingly communicative, with these devices having wireless communication capabilities between them. One of the questions that my colleagues and I had, and this was starting in around 2006 or so, is we had the question of what are the computer security and privacy risks with wireless medical devices? And once we know those risks, how can we go about mitigating them? And this is work done in collaboration with the University of Massachusetts Amherst and the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. The way we often try to answer these questions is to experimentally work with a real artifact to understand what the real issues are facing real devices. And to do this, in this particular case, we obtained an implantable cardiac defibrillator. This is a device that was introduced into the US market in 2003. So at the time of our 2008 study, it was a current generation device, not the latest generation device. And has short-range wireless capabilities on the order of 10 centimeters or so. We found that using our own equipment, we were able to wirelessly, again from short range, 10 centimeters or so, interact with this device and change critical settings on it. For example, we could change the patient's name and the diagnosis, or we could turn on or off therapies, and we could also make this device issue a large shock. Before we get any further, though, I want to step back and say that that security is not a binary property, that not all attacks will actually manifest into real risks. And I believe today that the risk to patients is incredibly small. So even though we found the ability for an unauthorized party to do these things, ultimately these things are still life-saving devices and the benefits far outweigh the risks. Nevertheless, we did this work to try to understand what might the issues be with this type of IoT technology. Let me turn to another example, the modern car. The modern car is becoming pervasively computerized, with 10 to maybe even 100 computers inside the modern vehicle. And these computers are often networked to each other. And the reason for this increasing computation and connectivity is a number of reasons, but one is for increased safety. For example, you might have a computer attached to each wheel that is detecting how fast each wheel is spinning. They might send a message over the car's internal computer network to another computer that tries to check, that determines whether one wheel is spinning faster than the other. And if that's the case, then that computer might send a message to the brake computer telling the brake computer to slow down the back right wheel. And it's through that process that we have traction control and the ability for the car to not enter into a skid. As security researchers, the question we ask is, well, what might an unauthorized party be able to do with the computers in an automobile? Similar to our work with medical devices, the way we began this was we purchased 2 2009 edition modern sedans. This is in collaboration with UC San Diego, where the UW team kept one up in Seattle and the UC San Diego team kept one in San Diego. We analyzed the computer security properties of the automobile and published our results in both 2010 and in 2011. If you've been tracking the news over the summer, you might have heard about a bunch more results coming out recently. But our work dates back to 2010 and 2011. I'm only going to talk about our results at a high level, letting Stefan dive into the work in a little bit more detail. At the highest level, we found multiple ways that an unauthorized party could communicate on the car's internal computer network. For one, the unauthorized party could connect his or her own equipment directly to the exposed diagnostics port underneath the dash, and from there communicate to the other computers on the car over the internal network. And we also found remote compromise vulnerabilities. For example, we found a vulnerability in our car's telematics unit. Our car's telematics unit has a built-in cell phone that effectively allows it to call 911 if it gets into an accident. We found the ability to call that car's phone number, bypass some vulnerabilities, and get our own code running on the car. So since a picture is worth 1,000, okay, whoops, forgot about that. So continuing the high-level summary, we found that an adversary able to communicate on the car's internal computer network could effectively have arbitrary control over the vehicle. For example, it could affect any of the information displayed on the dash, the vehicle's lightings, for example, turn off all the lights so even the brake lights don't work, the engine, the transmission, control the brakes, and so on. We also found that adversaries have the ability to gain this capability without ever physically touching the car through remote compromises. Since a picture is worth 1,000 words, I wanted to give you a few video examples of some of the experiments that we created. For this first experiment, we have Alexei Cheskas, a PhD student from the University of Washington, driving one of our test vehicles down a decommissioned airport runway. In this experiment, Carl has his laptop connected to the diagnostics port underneath the dash. And when Alexei gets to a certain speed, Carl's going to press the button on his laptop that will send a message over the car's internal computer network, forcing the car's brakes to apply, thereby showing that an adversary could potentially control the brakes of our car, even when the car is being driven at speed. We're talking on the radio to make sure all the parties are coordinating, and we have numerous safety precautions in place. And in fact, we had a police watching this experiment too. So Carl presses a button on his laptop to send a message over the car's network, and you can hear the brakes screeching to a halt. In our second video, I'm going to show Alexei again driving our experimental car down a decommissioned airport runway. When he gets to 20 miles an hour or so, Carl will press the button on his laptop that sends a message over the car's internal computer networks telling the car to disengage the brakes. And at that point, Alexei won't be able to stop by pressing on the car's brake pedal. So again, a lot of communication between all of us over on the radio, so we knew exactly what was happening inside the car. Carl presses a button on his laptop to send the packet over the car's internal computer network. So now Alexei's trying to accelerate. He's at 20 miles an hour, and he says he still can't brake. And of course, you can see the into the airport runway. I'll work on the better timing for when to say that. But from this particular car, the parking brake did work and did stop the car. Again, we were only going 20 miles an hour. We didn't want to experiment it faster than that. And for some modern vehicles, the parking brake is actually under electronic control. I mentioned that we had the ability to also compromise our car remotely, and this is through a vulnerability in the car's telematics unit. We tried to explore several end-to-end scenarios about when an adversary might actually, or what an adversary might actually be able to obtain by remotely compromising the car. So to do this, I'm going to show you two more videos that describe what we did in this scenario. In this particular scenario, it's an end-to-end theft example. First, we call our car's phone number, bypass the vulnerabilities that I mentioned, get our own code running on the car. And then once we can do that, we can remotely, over the internet, connect to our completely unmodified car, and do things like start the car engine, unlock the car's doors, disable the shift lock solenoid so that the driver can shift out of park, bypass the car's immobilizer, which is supposed to stop the car from running if the key is not present, and thereby enabling the person who compromised the car to just walk up to the vehicle and drive away. So in this video, this is Francie Rosner. She's another faculty now at the University of Washington. Again, we've compromised the car over the internet, over the cellular connection, and maybe I'll say a little bit more about the IRC bot. I'm not sure. I tried to cut some of the side commentary. I tried to cut some of the slides so that there could be on Stefan's part. And so you'll see that the car just started. Again, this is Francie. Here comes Carl, one of the other researchers on the project. Via the compromise, we've unlocked the car's doors, so Carl can just step in. Like any good car thief, Carl, of course, buckles up first. You'll notice that there's no key in the ignition. We've bypassed the shift lock solenoid, so Carl can shift out of park, and now he can just drive away. So the car's starting to move there. Our car also has Bluetooth hands-free calling. This means that our car has the built-in microphones inside the cabin. And what we found is we also have the ability to, once we've compromised the car over the cellular connection, turn on those in-cabin microphones and hear anything that is actually going on inside the car. So So one more video. In this video, Alexi and Carl will be walking up to the UW car. And prior to Alexi and Carl walking up to the UW car, Steve Checkaway at UC San Diego has compromised the UW car over the cellular interface. And Alexi and Carl are going to have a private conversation in the car. So here Alexi and Carl are walking into the vehicle, having a private conversation. And meanwhile, Steve Checkaway, in his office in UC San Diego, again, has compromised the UW car over the cellular vulnerability that I mentioned. Our car is going to be streaming GPS coordinates to Steve, so Steve knows exactly where the car is. And pretty soon you'll start hearing the real-time audio. And this audio was recorded in Steve's office, so the audio is actually of this high quality.
King Bowser's gonna be super excited that we finally kidnapped Yoshi.
And again, Stefan in his talk will talk a little bit more about, sorry, let's see, you know, exactly how we came about discovering these vulnerabilities, how we disclosed them, and what happened as a result. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to move on to describing a few more examples of security and privacy risks with IoT technologies. Another work we did with a modern automobile was we wanted to understand what are the privacy implications with IoT devices in our environment in general, and with the sensors that are in modern cars in specific. It turns out that there's a lot of, again, computers inside the modern automobile, and they're communicating between each other back and forth. And one of the questions we had was, if someone were to just monitor the communications that are already occurring in the car's internal computer network, could we, for example, learn private information about the driver? And in fact, could we identify the driver or fingerprint the driver from a small set of possible drivers? And in fact, we found that we could with high degree of accuracy. So we can fingerprint the drivers based off of the information that is already being communicated over the car's internal computer network. As another example of some of the privacy issues with IoT devices, there are a number of IoT devices that are being designed today and actually already on the market that sense information on the home's power line. And there's a number of reasons why these devices exist. So for example, if you connect one of these devices to your home power line, the device will help remind you if you've forgotten to turn off your lights, or how much power is being consumed by your dishwasher, and so on. And again, I'll work on a little bit the right way to phrase that. But one of the questions we had was, what are the privacy issues with these devices that are measuring information about the home power line? So for example, if you look at the figure on the right, or the left box of the figure on the right, it's pretty clear that something measuring the home power line can figure out if a washing machine is used, or if a CFL, which is a particular type of light bulb, is in use. But we have the question is, could additional private information about the activities going on within a home be learned from monitoring the power line? And we found that the answer is yes. And for the purposes of this particular project, we purchased a large number of TVs, and we found that TVs had different sorts of power draw effectively for bright scenes and dark scenes and so on. And because many TV shows are very kind of have characteristic patterns in how they go from light to dark and so on, we were actually able to figure out what someone was watching on TV simply by measuring parts of the power line. So again, examples of some potentially unexpected privacy risks with IoT technologies. We also see increasing computation in children's toys. Here's a photo from around 2008 or 2009 or so of several devices that are marketed for kids. The two circled in red are toy robots. These toy robots have Wi-Fi capabilities and built-in webcams. One of the intended usage scenarios for these robots is, for example, to buy them over the internet. As you buy them for your kid assembles them, and then your kid connects it to the home network, and then when the kid goes to his or her friend's house, they can connect to the toy robot over the internet and make sure that the parents aren't in their room. Unfortunately, we found that the manufacturers of these devices had not really proactively thought about security in advance, and that it was also easy for unauthorized parties to connect over the internet to these devices and also view what is happening inside the children's bedroom and so on. Let me give you one final example of some of the issues that we found in IoT devices, and this is one in particular for home automation systems. So many of you are probably familiar with home automation systems, whereby if you've left your house and aren't sure if you're locked your home door, you bring up your cell phone, connect your home automation system over the internet, press a button, and lock the door. The question is, what happens if a potential adversary shows up? And so here I have a picture of Tope, which was one of the PhD students on the project. It's well known that if an adversary can compromise the home automation controller, then they can control any of the equipment within the home. So for example, if you compromise the home automation controller, you can compromise the door locks or the window shades and the light dimmers and so on. And numerous people have demonstrated that such a compromise is possible. What we asked is, are there other perhaps surprising things that an adversary might be able to do that was unexpected? And we tried to push this question a little bit more, and we thought about the actual light bulbs that were connected to dimmers. So it's well known that you should not connect CFL light bulbs to dimmers, and in fact the CFL light bulbs connected to dimmers can catch on fire. Nevertheless, we do know that many homes and many people do connect CFL light bulbs to dimmers. And so the question we had was, if an adversary were to compromise the home automation system and then access that dimmer in an adversarially controlled way, could they make those CFL light bulbs pop? We found out experimentally that the answer was yes. Here's a picture of one of the light bulbs with a little bit of charring. And the reason I mention this example is that it illustrates to me some of the subtlety when we're thinking about security for IoT devices, in the sense that it's not just about what are all the devices that are connected over computer networks to each other, but for example, when the manufacturer of the light bulb created that light bulb, they probably never thought about it being put in an environment where it was connected to an adversarially controlled light switch or dimmer. And similarly, when the people who designed the dimmer, they probably never thought about the potential issues of connecting a vulnerable light bulb to it. So just try to paint the picture of the broad spectrum of issues that can arise with IoT devices. Okay, so I'm still working on this slide, a number of other ones, but so I want to get some high-level conclusions, and in this slide I wanted to present some kind of high-level lessons about the IoT issues. Haven't quite worked out all the details, but some of them are on the importance of threat modeling and risk evaluation for IoT technologies. Thinking about both the direct privacy leakage, for example, listening to the microphones in the car, as well as information leakage, for example, being able to learn information about what is going on the home's TV by monitoring the TV's the home power line. Safety issues, for example, the brakes that I mentioned, or the light bulbs issues. And also stepping stones, whereby an adversary might first compromise one device and from that point compromise another device. If there are several issues that I really want to also talk about in IoT, is the fact that in the future we'll sort of have many, many, many more of these devices in our environment. And so the question is, how do we make sure they all remain up to date and secure? And so some notion of the update problem as well as a zombie problem. Whereas the zombie problem is, let's say you buy an IoT fridge, it's maintained by the manufacturer for 2 years, but you keep it in your home for 20 years. What happens during those remaining 18 years when they're no longer maintained by the adversary, by the manufacturer? Some thanks that I'll need to squeeze in, and that's it for me.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so let's do Stefan now, and then I'm gonna see. I asked everybody to send I noticed that Dan joined us. Let's send the feedback later because we have like a little time.
Good.
Okay. And by the way, you're right on time. Great.
Oh, great, perfect.
Okay. So shall I start? Can you see me?
Yes.
I cannot see anything.
You may have to look around on the bottom and select among the people whose you want to see.
Your screen is black for some reason.
Yeah, now it's black. Yeah, now I see the presentation, but it's not. Okay, black again.
Shall I try sharing again?
Yeah.
Okay, I will stop sharing, and then I will reshare.
Okay.
Oh, I can see it.
All right. Everyone good?
Good.
Yep, and I'm going to mute because I now hear see Dan's comment.
Okay, good. I will start. So good afternoon. I'm Stefan Savage from UC San Diego, and I'm going to talk in a fair amount more depth about one aspect of the Internet of Things space that Yoshi outlined, which is automobiles. And automobiles are particularly interesting because they're things that we all have that in fact, are computer controlled. And the thing that scares us, I think, about IoT in the security space is that way in which an adversary might, through compromising computers, lead to effects on the real world that might, in fact, be threatening. And so to recap, for those of you who weren't here for Yoshi's discussion, I'm going to show you a little segment of a demonstration that we did on 60 Minutes for DARPA involving remotely compromising a vehicle that was being driven at the time by Leslie Stahl, who's that 60 Minutes anchor person.
All right, here we go.
Oh, no, 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 no.
And we here have disabled her brakes.
Oh, my God. I can't operate the brakes at all. Oh, my word. That is frightening. That is frightening.
And that, I think, is the essence about why we care about the automotive security problem. Today I'm going to talk, though not about lots of demos and so forth, but I'm going to try to get everyone in the audience to understand what is the source of the automotive vulnerabilities, and less the specific detail about specific vulnerabilities as what it is that is endemic to the way automobiles are manufactured that leads to these kinds of vulnerabilities being present in significant numbers. And similarly, for the same reasons, what are the challenges in addressing those issues? And then finally, through the experience that we had in doing this work, going back 6 years now, what role do security researchers have to play, and how has that evolved over time? Okay, so this picture, which is undoubtedly complicated, tries to capture the thing that Yoshi said earlier, which is that when you are in a car today, you are really in a computer that happens to have wheels. There is almost no aspect of a modern automobile's function that is not directly or indirectly mediated by a computer. When you step on the gas pedal, you probably have a mental model that there's some hydraulic thing happening that is increasing the amount of gasoline going to the engine. But in fact, what you are doing is actuating a sensor that goes to the engine control unit that then will balance a whole bunch of factors to figure out how to best mix the oxygen and gas and so forth to achieve what it infers your objective is, which is to go faster. The same is true of the brakes, of the transmission, of even things as banal as the light switches and the HVAC unit and so forth. All of those are having computers make the decision, and all of them are in fact talking amongst one another through a pervasive network that is inside your car, interconnecting all of these different computers. And finally, in the modern era, which is like the last 10 years, there end up being a whole bunch of digital channels that are outward facing that connect these networks to the outside world, either over the short range or in some cases through telematics units over the very long range, where in fact your car is, to a first approximation, a node on the internet. So to sum up, typical sedan is probably the most complex distributed system that you own. There's somewhere between 20 and 40 what are called electronic control units, or ECUs, that's the vernacular in the automotive industry, with a broad range of different hardware, from 8051 microcontrollers to these system-on-a-chip, power PCs that can be, gigahertz or more. There'll be dozens of different operating systems running in there, and they're all going to be interacting in a system in which, from model year to model year, the software parts may completely change, not a single line of code being the same, because a different manufacturer built it. Moreover, they're all internally networked, primarily through something called the CAN bus, but there's a variety of other systems, and increasingly externally connected, whether through various kinds of wired ports or wireless or various kinds of digital media. So this is not what Ford was thinking about when he did the car. The modern car really is a product of the internet. All right, so let's take a look at what this looks like inside, just to give you enough context that we can explain where some of these vulnerabilities arise from. So here's a description of the systems and network in a typical sedan, the one we looked at. And you'll see that there are these two different buses. In this case, implemented through the controller area network, what's called the CAN protocol, that defines both a variety of physical layers as well as a media access layer, and then a bunch of manufacturer-defined proprietary protocols. And so here you see there are two buses. One on the left-hand side has a bunch of the drivetrain components, the engine controller, brake controller, transmission controller. These are going to be updating at a very high rate to communicate amongst themselves to tell them about the conditions on the road. On the right-hand side, oh, and to be clear, high speed here means like 500 kilobits per second. It's not the kind of high speed you're used to. On the right-hand side, this low-speed CAN bus, about 33 kilobits per second, is for things that are updating not as quickly, like what station are you on the radio and remote keyless entry and so forth. And then there's some stuff in the middle, the body controller that's on both that acts as a bridge, and a telematics unit. This is stuff like OnStar, Sync, Uconnect, and so forth, that ends up also bridging both systems, so it can do things like remote diagnostics and actuation. And on the bottom is a little thing there that says OBD2. And this is a wired port that is connected to all of the CAN buses in a vehicle and is mandated by law originally for emissions testing, but has effectively become the access port for all automotive systems. And this is a very common architecture for cars being built today. All right. So the first challenge that you run into is that the inside of the vehicle is not hardened against an adversary. So remember that OBD2 port that I was talking about before. You can find one in your car. It'll be under the driver's side dash, and it'll look a little bit like this picture on the right. And so in 2010, Yoshi's group and mine did a bunch of experiments to demonstrate that, well, actually, if you were able to get onto the CAN bus via this OBD2 port, for example, that was sufficient to completely control the vehicle. And we are now publicly disclosing that the vehicle that we did this on was a 2009 Chevy Impala, and we were able to do all the things that Yoshi showed, control the brakes, the engine, the lights, basically anything that the car had that was computer controlled. Now, interestingly, in 2014, Miller and Valasek demonstrate exactly the same thing for the Toyota Prius and the Ford Escape, which is actually very powerful because it shows, look, this is not a byproduct of some detail that Chevy got wrong, but in fact generalizes, and that these issues are common to a whole variety of different vehicles. So why might be the question. And there's a variety of reasons why this is true. One is the way the automotive networks are built is around a kind of very open pub-sub style software bus architecture. So you can kind of think of this as Ethernet without even having source addresses. So everyone is sending out their updates, and this allows you to have these relatively loosely coupled devices that can be integrated, all things being equal at the last minute, and allows you to have a variety of different modes for coupling between ECUs. And it turns out that while we went into this thinking, well, can't you take the safety critical stuff and separate it from the non-safety critical stuff, then in reality that there are a whole slew of very subtle and complex reasons why there are really reasons why ECUs that seemingly would not need to be able to talk to one another, like why does keyless entry need to talk to the brakes, but that in fact there needs to be a path. The consequence of this is that simply sniffing on this bus allows you to effectively see these invocations, the RPCs between ECUs, and those can be replayed because this was designed in an era where there is no authentication, no encryption, or anything like that. The other issue you have is that we use the same network for maintenance. When you take your car into the shop, that network, as accessed through the OBD2 port, is used to do things like bleed the pressure out of your brakes so that they can go and look at what's going on inside your brakes, and a variety of other things. So the maintenance network and the normal network are the same thing, and that means that if you can reverse engineer these proprietary protocols, that you can, too, put the car into the same unsafe state that the mechanic will when the thing is up on a jack. Finally, the same network is how we update all of the software. So the way the software in any ECU in a vehicle is updated is someone plugs into the network and then sends a particular protocol back and forth, and they reflash all of the stuff. And so the consequence of this, again, is that you can go in and change all of the code. So in some sense, this seems really obvious, and in fact, this was the initial response I think we got when we published our first paper, typified by this article in the Register where they interviewed some security expert who basically, I will paraphrase, you can read, but he basically says, so what? So what? So they can go in and change all the code in the car, and then the car does bad things. this does not at all surprise me. Right? How would it not be this way? Now, that's not entirely fair. It could have been designed so it was not that way, or it was a lot harder to do. But it's a fair criticism that if you need to get into the car to begin with, then you could do all kinds of other stuff like snip the brake lines and so forth. He made this other statement that was somewhat prescient, which was basically said, all right, there's this one other thing that they hint at that might be a problem, and actually there's this one sentence in that paper that no one ever appears to have read where we say that, in fact, we've done all of this. And but that's neither here nor there. He says, but this is highly theoretical because hacking a car via telematics remotely is much harder than banking systems. No one's going to do this. The fact of the matter is that we had already done it. And so in 2011, we actually demonstrate that you can do a remote takeover without any physical access and at arbitrary distance. And this has now been publicly disclosed by Wired and now by us as being for the GM OnStar Generation 8 units. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but just so you understand the import of this, this means that for all vehicles equipped with this unit, we were able to remotely access and then from there achieve the same kinds of control that we were when directly plugged into the OBD2 port. And again, 4 years later, Milla and Valasek develop a similar attack where they're also able to remotely compromise a vehicle, in this case the Jeep Cherokee, using the Fiat Uconnect system, which is Fiat's telematics unit. So again, this generalizes. This is not a unique issue to GM, or to Fiat for that matter. This is the class of problems that the automotive industry has with these kinds of systems. So let's talk a bit about where this comes from. We identify 3 different kinds of remote compromise vectors. One we call the indirect physical channel, and these are things that you do directly plug into the car that can themselves be compromised. And so these are things like when you go into the mechanic shop, they're going to plug something into the OBD2 port. When you play a piece of music, you are putting a digital medium into the CD player that will then be interpreted by software. When you go into an electronic charging station, there's a digital communication that goes back and forth. And so we explored 3 of these in a variety of different works, and we're able to show that we could compromise the vehicle both via the shop tools, which turned out to be just Linux boxes that are standard at dealerships, through the CD player by specifically encoding a song so it would play fine on your laptop, but if you played it in the car, it would take over the vehicle, and then via aftermarket components that were plugged into OBD2 for things like pay-as-you-go insurance, or things that allow you to integrate your car's function with your cell phone. Another is what we call short-range wireless. So these are kind of LAN-style or shorter wireless technologies, some designed for this like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, other ones that are basically using wireless for things like tire sensors, keyless entry, proximity, and so forth. And we were able to, on our vehicle, show that through a vulnerability in their Bluetooth unit that we were able to compromise it. And then finally, long-range wireless, which is both broadcast medium like various kinds of digital radio, but most interestingly, the cellular medium, which is used for most telematic systems today. And I'm going to talk about that one really briefly just to give you a flavor for the kinds of issues that we run into. And so the vulnerabilities that we found were in the OnStar Generation 8 communications unit, which has a 3G cellular communications capability at the time. But in order to ensure the highest level of coverage, since the principal marketing use of this was to provide emergency notification in the case of a crash, they use the voice channel first because the voice channel has the highest level of coverage in the United States. As a consequence of using the voice channel, they use a software modem to encode digital signals over this voice channel. And so we had to reverse engineer how that worked, which was not at all trivial. It's very low speed, about 400 BPS. But we were able to do so and identified 2 classes of issues. One is the software modem, which was written by a company called Airbiquity, and the telematics code, which was written for GM by LG. They both seem to be well written, but they make different assumptions about how big a packet can be. The LG code knows it's communicating with GM, and it knows it never sends packets bigger than this. The Airbiquity code is a general piece of code that it can be used by a variety of different manufacturers. The result of that is this opportunity for a buffer overflow, should you be allowed to send long enough, and that we achieved through a secondary error in a proprietary authentication challenge that was kind of homebrewed in a way that was fairly easy to bypass. Together, this allows a remote compromise that can be encoded entirely in an audio file. So the mechanism for taking over the vehicle is literally playing a song over the phone after calling the car. And this gives you demonstrations like this one that we did for Nova, where we remotely can actuate the brake on the road via the OnStar system, which is somewhat dramatic. All right, so why do we have these same problems on the remote side? Well, the biggest one I think is Darwinian. So there have been traditionally no adversaries in the automotive world. Absent adversaries, it's hard to put in the budget and the focus and the attention on security process. So we would find vulnerabilities like stir copy on the stack that have not been seen in desktop software since the mid-90s. The other issue is that there's a lot of pressure both on the marketing side for feature creation and on the regulatory side. Things like advanced collision avoidance and so forth are pushing constantly to create new features, which in turn increases the attack surface. And this is happening both with greater levels of connection to the internet and also with the increasing amount of automation that we're giving to cars so that they can be increasingly autonomous. Finally, time to market pressures. One thing I think that very few people don't understand is that car manufacturers, the OEMs, do not actually build all of the components that go into their cars. In fact, quite a few of them, most of the computer components are built by third parties, and they are simply the integrator. And so that security testing a whole bunch of stuff that you didn't design is actually quite challenging. And that brings me to the other big issue, which is on the supply chain side, they're extremely cost-driven, and that drives everyone to reuse the same code. And so everyone's code does a lot more than any individual OEM needs, and invariably that leads to additional pieces of functionality being present in ECUs that the manufacturer may not even know exists. There are a ton of vendors that participate in building the software for a vehicle. And so at any given point, you will have 2 or 3 or 4 different manufacturers of software components whose software will be interacting with one another, but who don't really understand what the other is doing. And so that invariably leads to these imperfect interfaces where it all works if everyone's doing the right thing, but if someone does the wrong thing, it falls apart. And almost every single vulnerability we found was precisely at that interface between the software provided by different suppliers. This is exacerbated by the fact that you have incredible heterogeneity in hardware and software. There is no platform. And then finally, and this is quite unintuitive, I think, to people in the audience who have not worked in this space, the source code, by and large, is not available because it is proprietary to each supplier. So you might think that a Ford or a GM or a BMW actually will have all of the source code that goes into their vehicle, and you would be absolutely wrong. That source code actually belongs to the supplier and is not available under most circumstances to the manufacturer to look at. And this greatly complicates the ability to do security. Finally, very limited experience with product security. All right, so what to do as researchers? We provide information and knowledge about the problems and how to fix them, try to create incentives to act on that, but we want to do so in a way that minimizes harm to real people. And this is not always a trivial question to balance. And I'm going to talk briefly about how do you manage disclosure in my remaining time, which I think I'm running short on. So in early 2010, we found all of these problems in the Chevy Impala. We actively made a choice to try to not repeat what went on in the voting world and to work with the OEM and disclose to the regulator. We didn't do any naming and shaming. It's only really this year that we've been public about which car we worked with. And we did not release any code or details that would allow our attacks to be replicated. And the reason was our focus was to improve automotive security. We did not believe it was a unique problem to GM. We didn't think that focusing on them was going to get the industry to focus on the problem the way that it needed to. But moreover, we realized in talking with them that there was very little capacity to deal with the problem. And so there was an opportunity for us to help them understand the scope of it, but if we started off adversarially, it was going to be very difficult to get them there. So what happened? In the short term, we worked with GM and got bugs, all the bugs that we found fixed in the next model year and in Generation 9 OnStar, a variety of mitigations rolled out on the cell carrier that made some of our remote attacks harder to do. And in the medium term, GM seriously got security religion. So they now have a chief product security officer, Jeff Massimilla, who has 100 people working for him just on product security, where before, I don't know if there was anyone who that was their actual title. And a lot of changes to development practice, contracting. This is something that now deeply goes into the design over there. However, there was no recall. So all Generation 8 devices still had the vulnerability. And we weren't entirely sure how to feel about this, but this is a complicated question because what you really care about is someone going to get hurt? And so you have to ask, well, is someone going to do something if, based on what was known, and I think in the end we came to the conclusion that it was worse to put the code out there and make people exposed to it if there was not a reasonable ability to fix it on a reasonable time frame. Interestingly, 5 years later, it was disclosed by Wired this unprecedented fix where all Generation 8 OnStar units have been remotely updated, which is particularly interesting because they have no remote update capability. And so effectively what this means, although they haven't said it as much, is that GM hacked millions of their own cars in order to fix them, which is just an incredibly ballsy move. So by contrast, Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek basically did full-on public disclosure for most of their work. I'm going to focus really on the Uconnect part because it's the most interesting one. They found this vulnerability in the Uconnect system that allowed remote takeover. They worked with Fiat and NHTSA so that there was a patch release before public details and code were released. Under huge pressure from NHTSA, Fiat recalled 1.4 million vehicles. This is the first ever cybersecurity recall. This was helped by the fact that Sprint was able to block all of the traffic for the base cell compromise. It also, did this in a very public way, and so it had, I think, more impact on public perception than anything else that had been done. So this was what made the problem really visible. And so the trade-off here is trying to understand, well, what's the right thing to do in general? And I don't think there's a right answer. So there's a lot of situational differences. When we started, the industry had no idea what to make of us and had no experience with this. That has changed dramatically. So if you look at what Sammy found, the OnStar application bug, and they were able to turn around and fix in a couple days, totally different situation. Similarly, Charlie and Chris had the benefit of this network mitigation existing that meant that no one was really going to get hurt by disclosing this stuff. The one thing they did that I don't think anyone really thought through that had a huge positive benefit is that because the way you think about recalls is in terms of cost per vehicle, typically $200 to $300 per vehicle is the way you think about this cost, it did change the way manufacturers think about the problem. Because at 1.4 million, this is like $250 million, and it is not a reasonable way to run a company that you lose $250 million because two guys want to give a talk in Vegas. And so I think this has helped set the floor for how you do investments for cybersecurity in the automotive industry. And we've since done disclosure for similar reasons that I can talk to about offline. So direct consequences, almost everyone has remote update now, whether or not they're disclosing it publicly. BMW, Tesla, and GM all have it. It's basically become a requirement because the costs associated with fixing this stuff any other way are absurd. The industry standards body now has 2 draft standards that were created precisely because of the work that the research community did. One on how to do security analysis, another on hardware. And the regulator of record, which when we contacted them had no idea about security at all, now has a cybersecurity testing lab and so forth. And I can talk about the politics offline. And we have bills. So I'm not going to go into detail, but you can ask me questions about both the Senate and House committees have bills, and there's a whole bunch of other subcommittees that are drafting bills. This is, for some reason, everyone wants to write a bill about cybersecurity in automobiles. So to summarize, look, automobiles are computers with wheels. They're some of the most interesting IoT devices from a security standpoint. A variety of their history, architecture, supply chain, business models make security challenging. Everyone who's a stakeholder here now understands that, and they're responding, and they're not doing so at light speed, but they are doing so. And what's nice about this, I think, is this entire transformation is one in which the research community has absolutely played a key role. It would not have happened but for the work that we all did. Finally, I wanted to point out that disclosure is not, unless you're religious about this, is not a black and white thing. There are times when different kinds of disclosure processes are the right thing to do based on what the benefits and harms may be. And with that, I'll take any questions. All right. Done. So I'm still a little bit over, so I'll have to cut.
That sounded great to me. I really like it. How did you feel about the Well, I have a specific question about my talk, but how did you feel about the connection between the two?
Oh, that was fine. I don't have a problem with it.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Oh, Dan?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I came in towards the end of your talk, Yoshi, so
Yep.
I don't have a good sense of how they fit together. When I jumped in, you were in the middle of talking about IoT devices.
Yep.
So did you, at the beginning of your talk about cars?
I did, but I think in a way that was compatible with what Stefan said, and I just wanted to verify with Stefan in the sense that I was talking kind of high level of these are all the things that could happen, and I feel like, Stefan, you went into a lot more detail about, whys, and so on.
I think that's right, but we could also ask Danielle if she has an opinion, because she saw both.
Yep. Stefan, since you saw my whole talk, I guess my big question to you is, do you think I should have a little more depth, or is it okay to just survey all the different things that one can do?
I think it would not hurt. You know those things you wanted to say at the end?
Yep.
The structuring things?
Yep.
I think if you could figure out what those are, and then use the examples to highlight them,
Yep.
so that the talk proves the conclusions, as opposed to the conclusions are something that you suddenly infer from things.
Yeah, okay.
And because I think the challenge is, if the people aren't listening very closely, that the danger is that they're like, okay, they hack this, and then they hack this, and then they hack this, and then they hack this. Everything can be hacked.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about. Okay, that helps. That's a good suggestion.
And I think so. Trying to say, all right, here's what's different in this particular system. Here's one of the challenges here that's different from other ones. And here's why IoT is not just like another thing.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. I like that. That's a good suggestion. Okay, I will work on that. That felt like a big weakness of my talk. Okay.
All right, so Daniela looked like she had to go. Dan, do you have more you want to say to either of us?
Okay, so since I missed the beginning of Yoshi's talk, I have to qualify all this as saying, well, maybe.
Yeah.
But my gut says that starting in cars and then going off to IoT and then coming back to cars might seem a bit indirect. Whereas you might instead, just talking off the cuff, it might be better if you start off with, there's a world of devices ranging from light bulbs to cars, and they have all these things in common. And use that and then zoom into cars and then zoom into your particular car.
Okay.
Like that might be a way that you can build. I mean, I'm just thinking like a journalist, where you have a funnel where you start broad and get narrower and narrower.
Yep.
And does that sound like that would fit with both of your slide decks?
I will definitely think about it. I think it's a very good suggestion from a structural thing. The cars, I feel, is probably one of the strongest parts of my part of the talk. So, which is one of the reasons to have it earlier. So let me see if I can figure out a way that kind of keeps the talk straight.
So this is where I'm trying to think like this is TED. This is not a regular. This is more like TED than like Usenix Security.
Yep.
So like in the TED world, everybody likes to come out and say large things. And then they sort of zoom in a little bit.
Yep.
But so I'm suggesting, Yoshi, that you might want to come out and say large things about the future of stuff.
Yep. A good idea.
You have to have the radio announcer voice when you do it, though.
Right. I'll do that. Yeah. Okay. That's important to work on. Okay.
Any chance you can bring the car and park it somewhere inside or nearby?
Oh gosh, I don't think so. That's a good question, though, huh?
So you have one car in San Diego and you have one car in Washington.
The car in San Diego has been sold back to GM.
Really? They bought it from you?
Long story. I'll tell you over a beer.
And is the car in Washington still there?
The car in Washington is still here.
Would you trust it to drive all the way to San Francisco?
So the odd thing is, unfortunately, I have to leave almost immediately after my talk to DC. Believe it or not. So I'm not. I mean, I'm going to stay for Stefan's talk, but logistically, I don't think I could drive down, and then not sure what I would do. But it's a neat idea.
Yeah, I mean, just of course, to some extent, it's a car, but
Yeah.
it's also a prop.
Yep, that's true. Yep.
All right, Dan. What else?
That's all I really got for you. I mean, my main concern is just that you have really good flow from one to the other.
All right. So did you have any feedback on the body of my talk, or just the flow issue?
I mean, the flow issue is the big thing. I mean,
Okay.
your talk could stand alone with nothing before or after it, which is good.
Yeah.
But it's
Okay. So I have a question. I think I'm probably going to need to cut a few minutes. Do you have preferred places? Stuff where you're like, I could have done without that?
I don't think I have any specific suggestions for you.
All right. I'll use my judgment then. I'll see if Daniela has feedback.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot going on there.
There is. There is.
Yeah, hard to know what to cut. Honestly, I'm amazed that you got it down to what you did.
Well, I think I may cut a little bit more of some of the details about how the car works, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. Okay. Great.
Great. Thank
Thanks,
you all.
Dan.
All right. Thank you, guys. I'll see you
All
in
right.
San Francisco.
Yes, you
You
will.
in San Francisco.
Unless United abandons me again.
Uh-oh. Hopefully not.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
See you
Bye-bye.
guys.